We're live again. Welcome back to the T-Wack podcast.
Hello.
Two idiots with approximate knowledge. I
Oh,
am. Oh, is that? Did we hear you?
yep, I hear me.
Okay, perfect. We did it. We did it.
And now I'm
Jeffrey
muting the screen.
Bezos. We did it. This is the T. God
Fuck.
damn it. This is the
Don't
T.
remind me of that.
This is the T-Wack podcast. We're two idiots with approximate knowledge. My name is Nathan. This is Brennan. We just lost like 10 minutes of audio because I don't know how to set things up on anything worth anything. So here we are. Brennan, you've been painting minis. Nathan has been working too much. I have a girlfriend. She's moving, and I bought a house. You have a lovely lady. She brought home something from Europe that isn't COVID, but you're still sick. So that's the
Yep.
summary of everything, you guys.
Speed run.
Yeah, you know what? I'm a champion when it comes to speed. I'm incredible. Fastest man alive. I'm the Usain Bolt of speedrunning podcasts anyway. God, okay. I'm glad I want this to be the opening to the episode too. No, it's whenever we ever been on the rails.
I mean, usually you just kind of throw an intro at me as hard as you can, and I just kind of have to.
I have done that. I do that on the regular actually.
Part of the charm.
So, one thing I do want to talk about real quick. I did go through and watch a couple of our old episodes, and I think I really like most of our structure. We would do kind of a 3-point thing, which we're gonna keep. But mostly it was just about me trying to catch some of the things that I do, like constant mustache touching, and when I'm not going I am throwing out filler words. So we're
Listen,
gonna avoid that.
if you can replace and like with other filler words, I feel like that's half the battle
It is what it
for
is.
me.
So
If
anyway,
I'm saying different filler words, I feel like that's a success.
fair. So anyway, one of the things I want to talk about is actually talking about what we're going to talk about. And if anybody's ever written an essay, that's what you do. You talk about what you're going to talk about, you talk about it, and then you talk about what you talked about.
Right now, we're talking about what we're going to talk about.
Exactly.
So you're aware.
So what we're going to talk about is what we've been playing, our maybe segue that into our experience with some online gaming, and then talk about kind of the meat and potatoes of what I wanted to go into, our inspiration. And we're not talking about the mechanic in 5th edition, although that is an entirely different conversation. Maybe next episode. But Brennan, what have you been playing?
Uh, let's see. I've been just the other day I was playing some Minecraft again for the first time in a while. Been playing a little bit of Minecraft on and off. Been playing StarCraft, trying to suck less, trying to get some real good hotkey cycles down. I play Zerg because I hate myself, and I don't enjoy having fun. So that's what Zerg is best at. Um, so yeah, that's what I've been really doing, playing. I haven't been playing anything else. I think that's really most of what I've been playing lately. I've got a big ol' Steam library of Guilt that I'm not interacting with very much. What about you?
I have been playing mostly 2 games recently. It's been a combination of one comfort game and one game that it's easier to be social with. I've
Hmm.
been playing a lot of Mechwarrior 5 recently again. They released the
Hmm.
Heroes of the Inner Sphere DLC, which addressed some of the issues that I really had with the base Mechwarrior 5 game, and I can talk about that, and I'm kind of in the in-between. Um, but I've also been playing a lot of League of Legends recently. For reference, I played that game, I want to say season 2, maybe season 3 first. When it was really starting to gain its popularity and really starting to gain steam. I want to say it was right around when Darius was first introduced as a champion, maybe a little bit after that, because I remember the Darius load-in screen. And then I played pretty regularly up until about season 7. That was really when I was at the apex of it. It was right after the Juggernaut meta, and then I hit a point where I was done. I did not want to touch that game again. Maybe season 8. I don't really remember exactly when that meta was, but it was right after they did the soft rework from Mordekaiser and completely just played hell with his kit. Then I stopped, and then excuse me. And then I met Serena, and she got me back into League. And it was first just playing some ARAMs, playing all random, all mid. That's a very like safe way to play that game. A very low, chill, easy way to just punch through and enjoy it. You play on one just big old goddamn line. They give you random champions and they say, "Good luck, fucko." And that's a great way to like learn the team fighting aspect and learn kind of what your champion does in that vacuum, that void. And then I recently started playing normals again. I'm eventually going to try and jump into ranked as a top laner. And I've always been a top laner. The reason why, because in top lane, generally if you're losing, it's your own goddamn fault. It's hard to blame the jungler. That's not where the objective is. You can't blame the mid laner typically because most mid laners, in my experience, don't roam a whole lot, but it's probably because I play at a very low elo. And I can't blame the supporter at the AD carry because they're not in my lane. It's me. All me. If things go wrong, it's my fault. But for those of you,
when you're molding in ranked, I'll be here for you.
For those of you, for the 6 of you who don't know what League of Legends is, that is a multiplayer online battle arena. MOBA. There's a couple MOBAs out there. Dota is the other big one. Defense of the Agents or Defense of the Agents 2, which came from a custom game in Warcraft 3. So we can blame Blizzard for all MOBAs. And it kind of opens up the experience of multiplayer online gaming. Which is the very easy segue, because I was thinking about that on my drive to some clients today. I was like, what are we even going to talk about in the podcast? And I was like, well, I'm probably going to talk about the games I've been playing. I'm asked Brennan what he's been doing too. And knowing that you've been playing a lot of StarCraft 2 and that I've been playing a League, I guess the question stands, what was your first experience in multiplayer online gaming?
Great question, and I'm gonna have to think about it for a second. It's I think my first big time experience was actually in StarCraft 2, back in around the 2013, 14 days. I was like, I don't know, 15, 16. I remember I bought my old laptop. I'd saved up for it because I needed it for college, for running Start when I was 16. And I bought my new laptop and I was super stoked because I could play StarCraft 2 on my laptop. And I would bring it over to Ryan's house and we would play StarCraft 2 all day and I would play Protoss. And I've played on and off since then. I remember because I think I remember now. I joined after just about the time that Heart of the Swarm was released. Was when I joined the game. And I've only ever really been interested in when I play those types of games, I always want to play online. Those are the kind of games, and this is something we could get into if we have the time. There are many games like that where I never really want to just sit and play against the AI because to me that's not the game. The AI behaves so fundamentally differently than a human player that I feel like I'm not even really playing the same game. Not that AI, you can definitely play against people who are worse than the AI. You can make really bonkers AIs and stuff, but and I've said this before, I think even on the podcast, in online games like that, I feel like the AI is smart in ways that players are dumb, and dumb in ways that players are smart. And if you learn on the AI, this is my philosophy, if you learn on the AI, you're going to make mistakes. Like, for example, an AI is never going to just not notice something on the minimap. It's never going to happen.
Right.
Whereas a player is going to do that all the time. That to me is the biggest example. So it's anyway, there's lots of stuff like that, but I've been playing that game on and off since then, and I think I don't know. I have mixed feelings about that game. I think it's a really good game. It's very well made. I mean, that's not a very hot take. As for the community, I feel like I mean, I'm not good. My highest ever was gold, but it's it's one of those interesting things where you'll get tons and tons of great opponents who are nice and whatever, but it only really takes one dick to ruin the whole night. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it's kind of the same with League, where it really does. It takes one bad person either on your team or on the other team in all chat just being a flagrant dick, and it makes
Right.
it a miserable experience.
Well, and that's the thing that is different with League. I never played a lot of League. I've played a little bit with you. I played a little bit before with someone else. It's that fundamentally that it's a team game, and that makes it so much different than StarCraft, which is really more focused on the 1v1. It's not really balanced for teams.
Yeah, yeah, I get that.
And then there's just such a different aspect to it, especially when it comes to community. Because like you say, you're not just worried about the other team, you're worried about your own team. And there's nothing more infuriating and toxic than your own team getting mad at you or at someone else on the team for quote unquote not being good enough.
Yeah, and that's kind of the weird thing with playing League is that I feel like I'm gonna guess that in ranked, because I don't play a lot of ranked, it gives me anxiety. But I would guess in ranked, generally speaking, you're playing against people that are actually matched to your level, unless you're playing against Smurf accounts, which is a whole other bag.
Yeah.
But normals, those that matchmaking is a little weird sometimes, and it's tough because I've played in some lanes where it is about as perfect a lane as can be. Like, I'm playing Darius, the enemy's playing Nasus. They're overextending all the time so I can just get free kill after free kill and snowball hard. And it doesn't matter what else is happening in the game because now the jungler's trying to come up and gank and I can 1v2 them and just bulldoze them. There's stuff like that. And then sometimes you get counterpicked into oblivion. It's the way the kind of game rolls, especially with draft pick, where you can see what's getting selected, and like being the first draft, I think is like one of the worst because you're either going to pick something that could get hard countered or you got to pick something safe and just what you know. But and it's funny because I was watching a couple videos on League where counter picks don't matter nearly as much as people think they do once you get to a certain point because you know how you're to play the game, you know how to play safe and capitalize on mistakes. But League was not my first online experience by a long shot. Funny enough, I know you mentioned what 2014 was when you really started to get into it.
Let's see, when I was 16, I actually, you're gonna make me actually do math. I guess that must have been like 2013. So yeah, that's about the right time.
I think we got our jump in around 2000 oh gosh, this is where I show my age. 2000 something. It was early 2000s playing StarCraft 1, funny enough.
Ah,
Playing Brood War and playing just a butt ton of custom games over I don't think we were playing on dial up. I think we had really crappy DSL at that point. And then
sure.
playing a lot of StarCraft 1. But the what I remember most of like being cognizant of, oh, we're playing online with actual other people was playing Modern Warfare 1 in like
Uh,
2000, oh, whenever that game came out. This is I don't have a head for dates, which is unfortunate, but playing a lot of those games, and I didn't even pay attention to all chat in those games. Like, I never cared. I'd hop in, I'd drop in with the MP5 because it was OP as shit, and just play the game because it was fun. And did the same with
yeah.
Modern Warfare 2. I got accused of hacking a couple times, which felt really good. But
I feel
it's
like with those kind of Twitch reflex games like Modern Warfare, you don't you don't care as much about chat because chat is kind of out of sight, out of mind in a way.
yeah,
That's been my experience. I haven't played a lot of those games, but I feel like with stuff like League or StarCraft, where the chat is there and it's more of a like we're gonna sit down, we're gonna do this. And there's various conventions, let's say GLHF, or in GG and such like. There's just lots of opportunity to get mad and to talk about it.
yeah.
And not least, I mean, you know, you have a keyboard.
Yep, it is very easy to do that. Um, and it was kind of interesting because I played those games on PC. Like I the only time I've ever played console online was like the year that I had Xbox Live, and I
Mm,
played Halo 4 almost exclusively. Like that was the game that I played online. I played a lot of Halo Reach too, but that was with like friends at other places. Um, but I've
Halo Online is fun.
it
Just
is
bonkers. Just
it
bonkers silly.
yes it is. It's funny knowing that certain game types that are just so ubiquitous now started in lobbies where people were just like, "Hey, like I came up with this idea. Let's play the game this way," and people just
Yeah.
going with it. And now, like the zombie type that we have in
Yeah, like
Halo,
infection.
yeah, infection. That's the one. Like
Yeah.
that exists because a couple guys in it was like a Halo 1 or Halo 2 lobby were like, "Let's play it this way. Like jump in free for all. Here's the rules. Let's go." And that was
Yeah.
just a thing. We have all these different game modes, and even like I mentioned before, with League of Legends springing from Dota, which came from Warcraft 3. It's funny going and tracing the DNA of these games back.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm so fascinated by that kind of thing. It's just really interesting to look at how these things evolved, how things are connected in ways that you don't expect.
it's interesting kind of going back and looking at some of those old games too, and seeing which ones survived and which ones didn't and how they have, which is my really horrible segue into the other game that I've been playing, Mechwarrior 5. For those of you who don't know, BattleTech, which is where the universe comes from, BattleTech got its. I should have researched this. It got its start way earlier than MechWarrior ever did, and it started out as a tabletop role playing game, or a tabletop war game, actually, where you bought the little minis and you just played by their rules and all that kind of stuff. They built lore around it, but it was mostly just lore as an excuse to have these robots blow each other up. But I mean,
Yeah.
who among us can say that we have not come up with the same, like, total bullshit?
Yeah.
But,
Painting minis is fun.
right. So I've heard. So eventually they decided we got to make a video game out of this, which MechWarrior 1 was kind of the first step into it. I think they had a BattleTech game right before it, but MechWarrior 2 is where the game really cemented itself with. It was specifically MechWarrior 2 and their Mercenaries mode. There was a DLC, I think it was standalone at that point. Their DLC, MechWarrior Mercenaries, would make the game a lot more like freeform and felt like a sandbox, like a proper sandbox. And that was, a big thing at the time. I don't know that I played MechWarrior 2. I do have memories of playing MechWarrior 3, which did not have a Mercenaries expansion, so obviously nobody cared. And then my big experience with it was MechWarrior 4, subtitled Vengeance. And then the MechWarrior 4 Mercenaries was like the big one. And Mercenaries was a standalone game. And it could have just been a sandbox, whatever experience. They had a campaign tied to it, which was a big, cool thing. The Battletech universe and the lore is really, I think, fascinating, and I think a really good look at gritty sci-fi. And I have a tangent that I'm gonna go off here, where I look at sci-fi and I often run into what I find to be two different variants, and maybe you can either agree or disagree, or maybe add a third. You have very gritty sci-fi and very fantasy sci-fi, or gritty and idyllic, where, and I think
Yeah.
it is almost always because in any super gritty sci-fi, there's some kind of dark age in between where you're at and what happened before, and in a lot of the idyllic stuff, there's not. I often look at
It's
BattleTech and Warhammer as like my two poster children for gritty,
right.
horrible. Here's your horrible dark age, and then Mass Effect and Star
Age of
Trek.
Strife.
Yeah, Mass Effect and Star Trek is your very idyllic, beautiful, no horrible dark age type.
You know, I do want to touch on something you said quickly. I think I agree with the dark versus idyllic. I think there's also there's like a second axis on this graph, which is I would say like dark or gritty to idyllic is one axis, and the other axis is like I don't want to say fantasy sci-fi because I am talking about sci-fi, but I think on one end is like fantasy sci-fi, and the other end is like techno sci-fi.
Oh, that's fair.
Because you compare things like Star Trek or I don't know a lot about the BattleTech universe, but I don't think that there's a lot of fantasy elements there. Compare that to Warhammer, where it's like there's demons all over the fucking place. It's all about weird theocratic bullshit, and I think it's really interesting, and Dune too. I'm not super familiar with Dune, but I know that they have a similar thing with lots of psychic stuff, and it's it's interesting to me how these kind of divergent families of sci-fi have grown up amongst one another and influenced each other, and I think it's just really interesting to think about the evolution of that.
As I was talking, I was thinking about while I think this is maybe more pictured in Western sci-fi, because then I'm thinking about like um obviously with some outliers, but I'm thinking of like Gundam, Cowboy Bebop, and even like
Mm,
Firefly, which I know very little about. Where I don't know that they
mm,
fall into either. They've definitely fallen like techno sci-fi to an extent,
yeah,
but depending on what Gundam universe, what series you're watching, they have like the new types, which have latent psychic abilities, and that's a
yeah,
whole thing. But anyway, with BattleTech, the whole lore behind it is eventually humankind branches away and breaks into the stars, which creates what is eventually known as the Inner Sphere, this huge conglomerate of different systems, and each are ruled by. Eventually, they end up being ruled by noble houses. You have House Kurita, the Draconis Combine. You have the Federated Sons, ruled right now by House Davion. House Lao, which is the Capellan Confederacy. The Free Worlds ran by House Emeric. And House Steiner, which rules the Lyrian Commonwealth. And depending on where you are on the timeline, there's also the Free Raslahog Republic. Um, there's some kind of like Dark Age war that happens that actually is the reason why there's not a lot of nuclear war, because they realize that's bad. There's not a lot of like planetary bombardments and shit like that, where they eventually just transition to using these giant walking tanks to slug it out. And it's funny, Mechwarrior 5 takes place 3015 and on. There are some mech models that have been around since like the 26th century, and they talk about in some of the other BattleTech games, specifically BattleTech, which came out in like 2018, the turn-based strategy game that I think it was either Piranha Games or Harebrained Studios, one of the two. I think it was PG. I think it was anyway. They talk about how you, the commander, who you get to name and customize a little bit, you have been given your ancestral blackjack mech. And I think the blackjack has been around, like the model's been around for a couple centuries. And in my head, that was one of the original production line blackjacks. So in theory, if you follow the lore like closely enough, you could be piloting a mech that's like 500 years old.
wild
There's
to
something
think about.
like obviously you replace the parts and go, but there's something just so incredible and hysterical to me about that I really love.
That's got to be a ship of Theseus moment, right?
Right? No kidding.
It's like
As
none of
if
those parts rolled off the manufacturing line 500 years ago,
right, I was
but
about to
in a
say
very real way, it is the same mech.
as if I understand that reference. I'm not a
Ship of
learned
Theseus is
man.
just it's just the idea if you take the ship of if the ship of Theseus has a part replaced and then another part replaced and then another part replaced over the course of 100 years to the point where every part has been replaced, is that still the ship of Theseus?
That makes sense.
And then you take it further and say if you could took and gathered say that is the real ship of Theseus. If you take and gather all the parts that you replaced and put them back together, which one is the true ship of Theseus?
Ah, there it is.
Yeah.
Um, in the
Anyway,
BattleTech lore, sometime between 3040 and 3050, there's the clan invasion. Um, a great general commander took a big group of people, left the inner sphere, and went off to way beyond the peripheral realm, space unknown, and then came back his progeny came back to invade the Inner Sphere. Clan mechs brought a whole new thing to the game. The clan Omni mechs were better, faster, stronger than any mech of the Inner Sphere, and I believe the Inner Sphere held out because they finally banded together and had more people, and also stole clan mechs. And then I think right now the lore sits somewhere like 3150, right after like the Word of Blake and the Great Jihad. But as I understand it, nobody likes that era because everything sucks. It's more, the world is more interesting with like the third and fourth succession wars and the clan invasion. Like everybody loves that stuff because that's when war was at the apex, but wasn't littered with like the really weird stuff. With Mechwarrior 5, it takes, like I said, it takes place 3015 and on. They don't have any of the clan invasions, so there's no clan mechs, no clan equipment. It's just Inner Sphere mechs. And I have to say, that is one of my favorite 7 out of 10 games. I
You mentioned this a lot.
I have this concept that like, and maybe this stems from my childhood, and I think there's a lot of older millennial gamers that kind of sit in the same way where we don't mind games that are maybe not incredibly well polished. Everything doesn't have to be a perfect AAA experience. Warhammer 40k Space Marine is another really great example. It's just a solid 7 out of 10, brain melter action game. And this MechWarrior 5, it's got some issues, and the Heroes of the Inner Sphere fix some of it, but at its core, like, there's a fun, big, stompy robot game in there. And that's really the crux of it.
I don't want to go too long on this tangent because I know we have other things we want to cover, but I do find the very nature of mechs as a concept extremely interesting, and I think we've talked about it briefly before. Uh,
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's just such a fascinating idea to me. Something that humankind is really enamored with in our fiction, and the practicality of which it seems is dubious.
Oh, yeah, we love our big, tall, walking robots, but it's dumb. It doesn't work.
It's all like I've heard it described as such, you know, just tanks are better.
Generally speaking. I mean, the only advantage that some of these mechs have is that they can take more hits than anything else. Like the was it BLR 1G, the Battle Master, specifically the 1G configuration. That bad boy, the way I have it teched out, 6 medium lasers, a 6-shot short range missile like pod on the shoulder, twin machine guns, and a particle projector cannon. On a good day, I can one shot most like little vehicles. So, something to be said about this, big walking monstrosity.
Yeah.
Tank shows up and it just fires like just
Yeah.
so like there's a lot to be said about it. But generally speaking,
Okay.
like up until you get to, because the mechs range anywhere between the 15-ton flea to the 100-ton Atlas.
15-ton flea.
Yeah. Where on a good day, if you can line it up right, you can take the Atlas and one shot a flea, depending on your configuration.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. I don't know how much you know about Warhammer lore. Uh, we've talked very little about it. Uh, what do you know about the Tau?
Bunch of gosh darn space weebs is what they are, fighting for the greater good. Blue people. The only reason I know anything about them is because I watched the Bricky Orchid episode where he talked about the Tau, the Adeptus Ridiculous podcast, which is incredible. But
Sure.
they talked about how they work towards the greater good, and they do have a lot of mechs and mecha and all that
Yeah, that
stuff.
was why I brought it up.
Yeah, exactly. I guess in game they're like a big gunline army, but the second you get
Yeah.
into melee, it's bad. There's a running joke that the reason why any artwork that you see is of the Tau getting their ass kicked, and the argument is that of course that's the artwork that exists because when the Tau are winning, you don't see them.
Yep. Yeah, but that was the only reason I brought it up is because I know you're a a loyalist to your very bones to the glorious Imperium, but just thought I'd bring it up.
the very little that I know about the lore. But no, it's a good game. It's got some issues definitely. Like the AI is like pants on head stupid sometimes. It's sometimes it's rough to watch. Some of the maps are not really well balanced, although uh the DLC did fix some of that. The campaign, like the story mode campaign, sucks. It is so awful. I
That is unfortunate.
oh, it's just yeah, it's bad. It's not a good story. It's poorly written. The voice acting is not great, and it's really more probably on the voice direction. Like it's your very
Yeah.
canned, crappy story of revenge, and you get to the end of it. There's no satisfaction. I'm like, okay, cool. We just did another mission.
Yeah.
It leaned too heavily on its procedurally generated maps, and the ones where they were story missions were boring.
Hmm.
Strip away all of the weaknesses of that game and instead add in like a couple new mech patterns, 6 new mechs, a brand new mode, more well thought out specialty contracts. Heroes of the Inner Sphere, if they had started with that, that would have been an 8 out of 10 game. But
I feel like when you're making a mech game, you really, why are you thinking about story?
right, no, I get you.
Like, this is not the medium to tell a story in.
Well, it is and it isn't. It just
It
kind of
can
depends on what story
it
you're
can
telling.
be, but it I feel like you hamstring yourself a lot in terms of storytelling. And to be perfectly honest, people don't play games like that because they're like, "Oh wow, I can't wait to experience a compelling narrative."
No, I get you. I get you. But
Not that they shouldn't try and that you couldn't make a game like that that had a good compelling narrative, but it's just not the point. To me it's like with I have a lot of respect for games that have their priorities straight.
that's
Biggest
fair.
example I can think of is like Doom Eternal. What's the most important thing in Doom Eternal? That the engine and combat work and be satisfying. The
Yeah, that's
platforming
true.
and that the platforming work well. That it accomplishes all that perfectly. And I mean, Doom Eternal may be a bad example because everything about that game is so good. But the story is very simple. It's not there's not a lot of meat on those bones, but there doesn't need to be. And it comes through to me that they were like, let's build a fucking awesome game, and then slap together a narrative over an afternoon because it doesn't need to be complicated. And I have a lot of respect for that because I feel that a lesser game developer would have been like, we need to really dive into the narrative and written this big old chunky narrative and tried to kind of stick fun levels in. And I think that the game would have suffered as a result.
No, I get you. Yeah, it's such. God, Doom Eternal's so good too.
It's such a good game.
It really is.
So good.
So
And I don't want to shit on the story. Like the story is it's ambient lore and that's all it needs to be. It serves its function well.
environment-based storytelling or whatever they're calling it these days.
Yeah, but you don't have to sit there and read data pads.
That's one of my biggest issues with Dark Souls.
They just play it at you, and if you don't care, you can fuck off and keep doing the thing.
No, I get you. Yeah, it's some of the funniest stuff I've ever seen. I do like that kind of storytelling. I like that they're able to tell you more with just the imagery than they can with what they're saying at you. And I think that's important to know. You can have that narrative where you are displaying everything to the player, things are being talked about, things are being explained, and you do it right, and it's great because it's being presented well. But sometimes you have an experience like Dark Souls or Doom Eternal or really any of the Soulsborne, Sekiro, whatever games, where like you walk by and you see like in Dark Souls 3, you're walking by and you see on the high walls of Lorien, you see the shells of dead dragons just hanging, around. They don't tell you what's going on there or why they're there, but you're immediately just sucked into. There must have been a great battle here. Like that's what makes
Yeah.
sense. How else?
It's just
Um,
Yeah, it's establishing a tone, establishing a feel. I think that's really important in a game like that.
Yeah. No, I get you. Oh, it's some good stuff. It's some good stuff. So, but that's as we awkwardly transition. Although,
I was gonna say, speaking of tone, I think you wanted to talk about
there you
inspiration
go.
for
Yeah. So
for our various games and characters.
I was thinking about this because like some of my characters are very. I'd like to think they have some original grounding, but a lot of them are some other form of media with the serial numbers filed off. And most of the games that I have tried to run in some way, shape, or form have fit that in some way. But as I have played more characters and run more games, I settle into what I like and what aesthetics I've really enjoyed. And I kind of think back on how I've described certain things and how I envision certain creatures and characters, and I'm starting to realize where I pull some of the inspiration from. My sci-fi experiences, I pull very heavily on both StarCraft and Cowboy Bebop of all things. Where on the one hand, like I really enjoy this epic, overarching war that's going on with world-ending scenarios. But I also really love like the day-to-day stuff that happens in an anime like Cowboy Bebop, just the fun jobs here and there. And then if like, I can find a way to tie in the noble houses that exist in Mechwarrior 5, like I know nothing about it, but if I can have, House Free Shavakadu and House Giddy Momo or whatever, and all these
That's
different
main
noble houses vying for control, like that's I love it.
I know I bring it up every time, and I promise I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but like that fucking sci-fi game you ran was the coolest shit ever. Like I think about that game all the time. Every single session of that was so clean, and it was fucking awesome. That was a
Yeah.
rip-roaring adventure.
No, I get you. Hang on, I gotta respond to a text from a client.
I'll never. There were so many moments in that game that were just straight off of a, you know, cult classic sci-fi TV show canceled in its, second season. Like the moment where we ended the session right in the moment that we had a very dramatic, like Travis's character actually made a very dramatic, made a very dramatic character moment and like spoke out, leading to the decision of us turning the ship around and going back to the blast front of the just detonated nuclear zone to save civilians from the radiation. And we did that whole thing. And that was just so. And then I think the ship got fucked up or something, and then we had to get picked up. Like that was the coolest shit ever. I think that was actually just about when we quit because we never got a new ship. Man, that was.
Something like you never got your own new ship. You were signed on
Oh,
with another crew.
we were just hanging out with the fucking big old battleship, weren't we?
Kinda, yeah.
Oh yeah, the Embrace of Fire, which is the coolest name ever for a ship.
I
That
felt
was
really good
so
about that
cool.
one. The
That is the best
Bu
ship
Yi
name.
Pong.
Embrace of
They're
Fire.
all a bunch of warring space Koreans. It was House Mengshi, one of my favorite
Yeah,
creations.
that was so good.
The
That was
hammer.
so good.
But then I
Anyway,
started to look at like where I draw like my fantasy inspirations because I enjoy sci-fi media more than I enjoy fantasy generally speaking. But then I really thought about
Hmm.
okay, like I've run portions of a couple games and had a couple campaigns start, and I pull a lot of my inspiration I found from two very different places. Where I pull a lot of inspiration in my worlds from Dark Souls, and so much that I just love like the gritty, ugly world that it creates, and how like trying to find ways to make that really interesting and really fun. And then
Hmm.
Warcraft. I pull so much inspiration from Warcraft into like when I describe all my orcs as like big and green and like the Warcraft movie is the perfect example of what that looks like.
Yeah.
And then the storytelling gets kind of in a weird place because like I need to take another crack at building a. I kind of want to run just like a stock fantasy narrative with, a good kingdom and a democracy and then an evil empire or whatever with a bad guy at the helm and with
That'd
a
be
little
dope. I'd
twists
love
and
to play
turns
that.
here and there, but just trying to set aside the time to do it and then finding the way to stay on track with that and stay focused with the narrative it's daunting, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
But finding that challenge and figuring out what that world is going to look like. I also draw a lot of inspiration from like some of the Final Fantasy games that I've played, because I think at the end of the day, a lot of what we make is going to be derivative of what we enjoy in one way, shape, or form.
Which, when you think about it, that's not a bad thing. People like to act like originality is the end all be all of good creation. But if you're going by that metric, you really couldn't use anything. And we're all just building off of the cultural heritage of the human race, going back to the first stories around Neolithic campfires when you really think about it.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really cool in that.
Sorry, I have to.
Oh, it's fine.
Most clients I kind of set a barrier with, but some of them we're in a position where we kind of have to be doing this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Uh,
Excuse me. I know that as far as my inspirations go, I mean this won't be news to you. I draw. I mean, I'm no historian. I would hesitate to even call myself an amateur history buff because I'm too lazy to read books. But I I draw a lot of inspiration from the feel of my worlds, from the things that I do know about medieval history, kind of medieval to Renaissance. And I think when I picture my world, I often think in terms of it's a romanticized version of medievalness, but not as romanticized as I think many fantasy worlds are. In the sense that I like to think about, okay, why would this city be built in this way? It's like this city has walls like this for this reason. Like I really like to dig into the history and kind of sort out where I want my world to have been, and then it feels like it falls more and more into place for me. I like to play with, and you've probably noticed this, I like to kind of play with classical era social constructs in a medieval flavor of aesthetic. I really enjoy, I'll have empires, or I'll have republics with consuls, and I mean I won't call them that, but like consuls and senates and stuff. And I think that can be really interesting, and I think it's something that we don't get to explore a lot in fantasy narratives, where it's often the kind of baronial feudal system of like, this lord rules over this area. And I do use that, but I like to kind of fold that into, like I said, more classical structures of government. And I think it makes for really interesting situations. And I think when I run my worlds, I really like to have connected institutions. I like for it, I like to build worlds where every peasant feels like they have a sense of citizenship in some degree,
something
because I think it makes things interesting.
something I've noticed as having played in two of your worlds all the way through is your attention to detail in the world and the way it feels very lived in, and it feels very. I don't feel bad about asking you kind of a weird question out of left field, because you're able to, if you have to stop and take a second, you do, to give us an answer. Or a lot of times, what I've noticed you do is you just ask us, which is like the smartest thing I think any DM can do. Is that if your players are asking you something and you can find a way to put it on them, have them write your lore for you.
Hmm.
It's,
Yeah.
I think it's a great way to do it, and it involves them in such a great way. But your worlds feel very. There's something very organic about them, where it doesn't feel like walking into like any world we've ever stepped into, I don't ever feel like I'm walking into like the level 1 JRPG town, which I don't have a problem with, by the way. If
Sure,
you're
no, there's
running
nothing wrong with that.
if you're running your game and that's what like the starting area feel like, that's fine. I don't care. Like, it's not going to take me out of the experience. You're totally fine to just have, here's
Yeah.
town 1 that has the mayor that has a weird problem, and the barkeeper that's always polishing the glass, and the one shopper keeper that seems to have a little bit of everything but not everything. And then you move on to the second town and it's like, you leveled up. That's
Mhm.
fine.
You know, as far as inspiration goes, and thank you, by the way, for the compliment. But as far as inspiration goes, I just realized one place I really do take a lot of inspiration from, kind of to bring it back to the topic that I veered widely from, is Terry Pratchett novels. I don't know if you've read any of those,
But I don't
but
even know this about it, but I can't read, so.
well, they're also an audiobook. Hashtag not sponsored, Audible. But the many of them take place in the fictional city of Ankh-Morpork, which is a the fundamental premise of it is we get to see regular people living in the world of the heroes, and the heroes are kind of a joke. It's kind of like, and the more on he gets in the books, the more he kind of moves away from the high fantasy stuff, and more he kind of gets into the gritty of what it's like to live in this big city. But he just really builds these vibrant, living, like this vibrant, living city where you really feel like you can, you know, live and breathe it, and you can walk through the streets, and just there's just so much going on all the time. I think the biggest thing that I take as inspiration and as an aspirational goal for when I would build my worlds that I get from Terry Pratchett is the sense that when the players turn the corner, something was already happening and something will continue to happen after they leave. They're
That's huge.
like I always try to build into my narratives when you guys are just walking around the city, which is one of my favorite things that happens. Like one of my favorite parts of the game is when you guys are just dicking around in one of the major cities and I get to kill 4 hours, just no plan, just you walk around the corner and something happens.
Bobby
Particularly when Travis
happens.
is running his
That's what
character.
happens.
Yeah. But yeah, like just thinking about, what is happening in this world when the players are not present. And I think that when you can really, this is my experience at least, when you really think about world building from that perspective, I think it becomes a lot easier to know what to prep, know what not to prep, and know how to focus on things, and know what you need to design ahead of time, and what you can just roll with. Like, for example, the uh the city that you all went to in my last game, where you kind of met with that big council in the Alliance. I was like, what do I know about this city? I know it's the capital of the Alliance. I know that there's a great big, hall, and I know what it looks like in my head. I know some like 3 to 5 things that I can just point out as like obvious physical traits, and I know why it was built and when it was built. And I think that when you know those things and you know like kind of the relationship of this object that you're creating with the people who live in it and buy it, it really becomes pretty easy to be like, okay, what does this place look like? Well, they have a lot of Bobby was like, I'm gonna go and sneak into the backstage. It was very easy for me to be like, well, what does this look like? Because I knew what its function was. I was like, this is a place where a bunch of fancy people who think they're all that meet to have big meetings. So what is there backstage? Well, there's probably a bunch of carpeted corridors with various green rooms and dressing rooms, and it's some and you would relate to this. Having been in a lot of backstages and dressing rooms, I can have a very clear idea of, okay, what would that look like? These cluttered rooms filled with random junk, such as a couch that could be stolen by a wandering Goliath.
Oh god, I forgot about the couch. Yeah, it's funny because the way you set these worlds up to and the way you describe them, it's very easy for them to feel lived in. It was to the point where in that intermediate, like in that intermediary between when we encountered the antlered man in his like spectral form and sent most of us crazy except for me, which was like the biggest like badge of pride I've ever worn as a D&D character to be like, yeah, it's a fighter of all things. It's just like, I'm not dealing with you. I'm done. No,
It was
your brain stuff.
it worked
No.
so well.
Oh,
It worked so well thematically. I couldn't have it couldn't have gone better because
I've
you're just the tired dad hired to take care of this fucking weirdo, and this goddamn gosh darn thing from the other fucking dimension shows up, and you're like, I'm not putting up with this.
it's Callan display like the way he rolled was exactly the way I wanted him to do. And like it is the one few characters that I have that rolled perfectly in all the right moments where how can he be as badass as possible in this moment?
Yep.
It's standing up to this and not like losing control of everything. And what does he do? I don't remember exactly how high I rolled, but I rolled way above. I
You
think
rolled
what
very well.
you said it was above the DC you had said. I was like, oh shit.
It was.
But like me and the dragon were the only ones who weren't affected by it. And everybody ran off. And between that and getting everybody back, like I really sat and thought, well, what does Callan's winter break even look like? And I can kind of like I sat down and wrote like a little short story just for myself so I could get myself in the head of it. And I can envision like the world in which he was, the streets that he walked down, the tavern that he stayed at, the people that he met, like there it is a world that I can very easily envision as if I'm trying to remember like a movie set.
Well, I'm so glad that comes through because that really is. I think it's one of my strengths as a DM, and it's one of the things that I try the hardest to do. I think that I think that one of my weakest one of the weakest I think aspects of my DMing is uh, just like the character acting. I don't feel like is always that great, and I don't really do character voices because I don't want to screw my voice up. But I think that it I get away with it sometimes because I know everything about this guy. I know what his relationship is with the world, and so it's easier for me to just kind of conjure somebody up. Like I said, I feel like I sometimes I don't do as well as I would like to bringing individuals to life, but I feel that I at least know what their place is. I have to say, as far as Callan goes, it was always so great. This is just a general DM thing, is knowing your players and knowing how to make random encounters that suit their strengths. And I say random encounters in the sense of anything, just things that happen. But I always knew I was like, okay, what do I do? Want to do right now? It's been a little bit of a lull. People are the group is kind of thinking about something. They're maybe a little bit lost in their own heads. What can I do? I know someone will come be a dick to Callan, get their ass kicked. And that'll be fun. And it was like it. I remember I was so pleased with the little subplot where you went up north to fight that purple worm, and you ended up hanging out with that noble for a little while.
That was kind of neat. There was like there's so many great moments that existed in that campaign, and like the awesome set piece moments were incredible, and I will always remember those. But I remember them as equally as fondly as those moments where we're just goofing around and
Yeah.
be in trouble like for society.
I love thinking about just like because this is the thing for me is I've always really enjoyed the idea of playing a very very like life sim style of role playing game. Because you can range on the spectrum all the way from pure war game to pure life sim where you don't even have hit points, right? And I think for me, I've always kind of wanted to do something like that, and so I love letting that happen in my games. And it speaks very well to the quality of the players and the cohesion of the group that can happen. I don't have to do much. I remember like super like when you guys were like we're gonna go buy some donuts, and we spent like an hour on that
Yep.
because you just wanted to buy all the donuts, and I was like, I was like, well, it's gonna take. They have to make more. Like you have to wait, and just like the shenanigans that went on, and the fact that I could think about, like how is this gonna affect? Like people are gonna be talking about this guy who came in and ordered all these donuts, but at the same time, it's like I, I always appreciated like you guys were really cool, but I always had it in my mind like the average townsfolk in my big cities, and this is very much a Terry Pratchett thing, kind of had the attitude of like the classic grouchy New Yorker attitude. Like never heard of him. Like
Yeah.
the kind of idea of like whatever, man, I gotta go to work. And I don't know. I really enjoyed doing that. So I'm very glad that came through. I want to say one of the things that I was actually mentioning this the other day to somebody because I was talking about your space game, and I said like I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was like one of the coolest things about Nathan's games. I think you capture this in fantasy as well. Is just like it feels you're really good at creating these like emotionally evocative scenes and environments. And I think you have a lot of success in something that I think I struggle with, which is I mean, sorry, rural environments. But when we were walking, I remember in your most recent, I think it was your most recent game, we were walking through the woods, and it was just so easy to picture, like the kind of cold, northwest pre-climate change, foggy woods, and just like the nice smells and the pleasant sensations, but this kind of gloom eating, at the very corners like
I'm
a
trying to,
corroding
because I
photo.
I remember what you're talking about, and I'm trying to remember how I described it. Where it was like, striding through these. I often think of it, and I liken it to my own childhood experience of walking through the woods, where you have these big tall trees with these, sweeping open canopies. You have different species of trees as well, the more like big leafy trees as well as like the pines and stuff like that. But you have that fog that hangs, and
Hmm.
because you're in the thick of the trees, your sightline is a little bit further because of the trees that are hanging and everything that goes along with that. But you have that pleasant smell of moss and just that ever present, like dank, mildewy smell. But because it's in that setting, it's not so
Right.
unpleasant.
It's a
And
cool humidity.
yeah, it's one of those things that if you've experienced it, it's easy to describe it and then make it
Mhm.
so somebody else can understand it.
Another thing that I think you really excel at is, because this is again really into the space game, the the way you described like the embrace of fire and the it was so easy to picture, the warbling klaxons and the uniformed crew and you know techs with their top half off and in their tank top with oil up to the sleeves, everyone running at cross purposes but with a certain kind of coordination. As the ship was coming under fire, it was just so easy to get that scene. You do, like, for lack of a better word, you do oil and bolts really well. And I think that's something that's easy to it's something that people might think it's easy to do, but it isn't. Because you start to be like, wait, what's actually in a ship like this? And I think that you really nailed it. And that was one of the things that made it so exciting. And I think another thing that always made it so exciting was just like the narrative just never stopped pounding.
The way I've always looked at scene description is describe it in as many of the five senses as you can. What does it look like? What
Mm-hmm.
does it sound like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? And if you can hit all of those things as you were describing it, it makes it a much more visceral experience where I can describe, for that example, the feeling of the sound of like metal on metal as boots are like armored boots are running across a catwalk, the sound of the warning alarms and the shuddering impact of, it wasn't boarding ships, it was something else at the time.
It's like
um
alien pods.
yeah, like that taste of manufactured air, like all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
I find that for me, it's what makes sense because that's what puts me in a space. If you can get one,
Totally.
that's fine. Like get one, and it's usually what it looks like. That's for most of it's the easiest. But for me, And I'm wondering if this is where this stems from because fun fact, uh, am horribly visually impaired. I wear contact lenses. Otherwise, I joke with people, but this is truth. My vision pretty much stops and ends right about here, where it just becomes a big blurred mess.
Yikes.
The glasses that I wore growing up, we paid a lot of money to make them the really thin material. But when I went out and bought an extra pair just to have, in case I didn't feel like wearing my contacts, like they throw them Coke bottle
Wow.
lenses. That big goddamn nerd over here. But because like I grew up without that sensation as strong as other people, and because for you and me both, we spent so much time in music where we have to be super aware of what we're auditorily processing, like that's huge. And I think when you can add in what you smell, is it something acrid, is it something dank, is it pleasant, is it crisp, is it nothing, you know if you can get all of those lumped in, it really helps describe the scene. And I don't ever expect anybody to go into that kind of detail because for some players it just goes right over the head. Like nobody cares. It's what we want to know is what are we killing next, which is funny because I'm one of those players. Um, but as a
Well,
DM,
but
I've
there's players at the table who do care, and I think I think sometimes you get into that mindset, but you'd be surprised how much even the characters who are just looking for the next kill, the players who are just looking for the next kill can start to really care about that stuff
I'd always like
and
to
really
think that
take time for it.
it makes killing all the more fun. Don't take that out of
Exactly.
context.
I mean, but like like with Callan, for example, or really any of the characters that you've made in my games, because they've been very different, but they've all kind of been that like very martially focused characters. But I always knew, like I always felt like I could give you like the moments were much more satisfying than if I just threw you up against, if I just rolled on a table and was like, okay, cool, a bullet attacks you. Like that's fun sometimes for sure, but I it's so satisfying when it's like you're walking back through the darkness and the sleet and the cold and the silence of the forest, and your friend, one of your friends is passed out in the back of your wagon. The other one of them's run off into the wilderness and the other one flew away. And then the fucking ice starts cracking and something's coming out. It's a goddamn Hydra. Get the
I'm right.
taste of blood in
I'm
your
about to
mouth.
throw down. One of the important things I think when it comes to scene description too, I like how this went from like inspiration to world building. Um, One thing that I try to focus on, and I appreciate people who this is something that I think a lot of people don't think about, is never or seldom do you ever need to describe what the characters are feeling outside of those
Hmm.
senses.
Hmm.
Set what is objective and they will decide how they feel about it. Don't tell somebody they're scared. Describe a terrifying situation and let them describe how they feel about it. Because then it allows the characters who are allowing themselves to be scared, they can be frightened, they can be terrified. But the characters who want to be like badasses about it, you don't rob them of that.
Hmm. I remember kind of a funny example of that is when we did that the first ever session of the campaign that has now become the Hell campaign. Uh, Hell because of how often we don't play it, but where you were all meeting up in the Plane of Fire to discuss your fee for or maybe it wasn't the first session anyway, but your fee for infiltrating the elemental plane of Earth and stealing something. And Travis's character wanted a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and what I wanted to express was this is as good as a peanut butter and jelly sandwich can be. But I was like, oh yeah, you find it just really good. And he was like, hold on, Brennan. I want to describe how I react to this.
Yep.
Right. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about and then he brought up something which was hilarious and was something that I couldn't have known because, it was something from his backstory that he didn't have planned or written down, but he just knew. And I think it is important. I mean, I think you're exactly right. Like, just explain what's happening, explain the sensations and the environment, and then let the let the characters decide, the players decide how their characters react. Kind of segueing from that, I would actually be very interested to hear, to talk a little bit about what each of us take as inspiration for how we build our characters. What pieces of media really, or what is the thought process that kind of drives your inspiration when you're creating new characters? I mean, I can guess some of it, but I'd like to hear in your own words, you know.
Actually, I think that would be a great thing for the next episode because we're coming up on about an hour, and I still have
Oh, that's right.
a fair amount of work that I still need to jump in and get done before the
I
night
think.
is up. But spoiler alert, I'll let you guys know I pull less from media and more from people when it comes to creating characters, and I can talk a little bit about where that comes from. And I pull them from personal sources.
Hmm.
But I do know everybody approaches a little bit differently. Sometimes thematically we design them a certain way, and there's a lot of times where I'm like, yeah, this is just straight up this. But yeah, not to hedge you off of the past, but I do know we wanted to keep it
No, no,
around
that's
an
fine.
hour. So,
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
but yeah, it's that's it for tonight. I think moving forward we'll have more time for longer episodes as work starts to wind down for me a little bit, and hopefully we can tackle these a little bit earlier. Um, Ideally, and obviously things can change, but I'd like to try and chase down a at least once every 2 weeks we get an upload in. Um,
Sure.
and then we're gonna be looking into. Brennan doesn't know this. We're gonna be looking into distribution platforms. One of my dear
That'd be
friends
cool.
who I just helped buy a house runs stuff off of Anchor FM, and I'm wondering if we can chase that down as a possibility. But for now, episodes are just going up on YouTube, unedited and everything, because God, I am just the laziest human being on the planet. But Brandon, before we go, do you want to leave the audience with anything?
Uh, in your personal interactions, make the priority of making other people feel comfortable more important than the priority of feeling smart.
Wiser words never spoken. Everybody, this has been the T Wax podcast. My name is Nathan. This is my co-host Brendan. You can find me at the Twitter link above, Roby1Kenobi91. And I went ahead and just posted your Nutlord account for Bren Bricks, because you have two very chaotic, very very different Twitter handles. Um,
And I never
which
tweet on any of them.
no, you don't. You just retweet stuff. But this has been the T Wack podcast, two idiots with approximate knowledge. It has been God, I love doing this, and hopefully we can get some more episodes rolling. But this has been the new beginning. So take care, wash your hands, start masking up again until we get this Delta thing figured out, and hopefully we don't have more variants. Get vaccinated. It's not
Yes.
hard. I
No.
know it sucks. You don't get superpowers. You don't get internet. You don't get magnetized. You just get resistance from one of the worst virulent diseases we've had in a long time. I know. Really lame,
Uh,
but you got to do it. Otherwise,
yep.
we're just going to be wearing the masks forever. I know how a lot of you hate that because you're weak. Um
Anyway, yeah.
so yeah, let's end this thing together and be safe, be kind to each other, and all that good stuff. Goodbye.